The X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X-Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, Relmar McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome back to the X Zone, everyone. I am Rob McConnell, and we're coming to you from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, live and around the world on the X Zone Broadcast Network and on TalkStream Live. If you'd like to send an email, xzone at xzoneradiotv.com, or to the studio where I am sitting right now, studio at xzoneradiotv.com. Check us out on all the social media sites, and you can actually join the X-Zone Facebook group by going to facebook.com/groups/X-Zone Radio Show, and our website, xzoneradiotv.com. My guest this hour is no stranger to the X-Zone. Dale Kaczmarck is our guest. He is the president of Ghost Research Society, director of Excursions into the Unknown, Inc., the only year-round bus tour of haunted Chicagoland locations. He's the founder of Ghost Research Society Press, producing high-quality books on the paranormal since 2004. He's also the executive producer of Ghosts Across America, lecturer, researcher, and teacher of workshops and seminars in ghost hunting techniques. His website, ghostresearch.org. And Dale, welcome back to the X-Zone. How is it in Chicagoland? Are you still getting spooky?
Getting spooky and getting steamed out here with the heat.
Oh my gosh. Hey, here's a question that I bet you've never been asked, my friend. Is weather a factor when it comes to ghost hunting? Do ghosts prefer certain weather over others? For example, in this hot, steamy weather that is being experienced right across Canada and the United States, are ghosts more active or less active?
I don't think they're actually even either more or less active, but we have sometimes found that there may be lunar implications often associated with ghost activity or even solar activity. In the case when we go out to do investigations, whether it be a private home or a public place or state of business, we always look at the websites for the various geomagnetic activity that may be produced by the sun, sun flares, solar prominences, which very often react upon, can cause reactions in the sensitive equipment we do use. And of course, there's always been that old adage that things around the full moon look kind of crazy, and that's where the term lunacy comes from. It's from, obviously from the lunar of the moon. And there has been some correlation between both solar activity sometimes and even lunar phases.
I know that from being in law enforcement and my wife being in the medical field, that during the full moon period, there was, as far as my job in the cop, things happened, strange things happened during a full moon. And of course, my wife would be the first one to tell you that in the medical community, they see more accidents during the full moon than they do any other time of the lunar cycle.
Absolutely, and that's been something that's been going on for as long as the moon's been hanging in our sky, pretty much. I don't know if it has something to do with the gravitational tug, that the moon being closer or further away, that has something to do with reacting for people's own psyche that causes them to kind of go off the deep end, or if it's something that we just don't understand.
Well, from what I understand, it's all based on the moon's pull. For example, the moon causes the tides. And because we are mostly comprised of water, that we also are affected by the moon's pull.
It makes sense. Definitely does make sense. I mean,
Yeah.
we're 70% water,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously if the moon can actually affect the tidal
Yeah.
waves and ocean currents and so forth. I mean, it surely would have some sort of minute effect, to a smaller degree, I guess, on to human beings.
Dale, for those of you who haven't, for those of our listeners who haven't had the pleasure of hearing you before on the show, tell us what got you into doing the work that you're doing as a ghost hunter and as one of the lead researchers in the field.
Well, it's something I started way back in 1975. In fact, actually, my interest goes all the way back to childhood. Actually, my parents telling me ghost stories when I was a youngster, and that's what really kind of got me involved. There's some very famous ghost stories here in the Chicagoland area, one being Resurrection Mary, of a hitchhiking ghost story. And that's always been something I've been always kind of fascinated with, is the idea of, the folklore kind of getting involved with ghost research. But my parents telling me ghost stories when I was a youngster, kind of growing up later in life and trying to find out if these stories I was told as a youngster were simply, old wives' tales or legends and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Started a group back in 1977, which is still running strong today, called the Ghost Research Society. It's one of the longest-standing groups in America. And we started out with just a bunch of several individuals of like-minded individuals that had an interest in this field. And it just kind of ballooned from that point, attracting more curiosity. Started to do some lectures around Chicagoland area, the bus tours in 1982. Kind of generated a lot of interest, especially, of course, after the movie Ghostbusters came out too as well. So I think, all of this kind of helped my career basically in the field. And of course, these TV shows that we see nowadays, some are not as good as others, and I won't mention who they are. But I mean, it has had an impact on the people entering into the field of the paranormal.
Yes, it certainly has. It certainly has. There's a question that came to mind the last time you were on the show, and I wrote it down, and I'm so happy you're with us tonight, because I'd like to throw this question to you and get your reasoning. I can understand how a ghost may be formed when something traumatic happens and there's an imprint of the physical body based on the composition of our bodies and the fact that, the electromagnetic fields and so on. Okay, I can understand that. But if that's the case, why aren't ghosts naked? Why do they always wear clothes when clothes are not part of what would be imprinted in the electromagnetic field causing the apparition or the ghost?
Well, there's several different trains of thought on that.
Okay.
Basically, number one, there's two main categories we kind of place ghosts into. The residual category, as you mentioned, which is kind of like a tape loop.
Yeah.
There's no real intelligence. It's basically a psychic imprint of something tragedy that's happened in the past. And then you have what we term the intelligent ghost or intelligent haunt, where there actually is interaction between the living and the dead. They actually see us. They can interact with us through EVPs, through touching, cold spots, actually hearing sounds and voices and so forth. When we deal with the intelligent ghost, for the most part, it's usually through interactions, through such things, devices like digital recorders, cameras, where we get physical evidence and where we actually get some sort of interaction. The idea of the residual haunt, the residual ghost, is basically being something that has imprinted itself in the fabric of time and space because of some sort of tragedy that's happened in the past. And if we're looking at maybe some sort of psychic imprint, what are we actually looking at? Are we looking at something that, number one, has happened in the past, or are we looking like through the looking glass, sort of like kind of opening up a doorway, if you will, and kind of looking back at a scene of time and reason in the past? And that's where a lot of researchers are kind of split on that. That's the reason why spirits, ghosts, if you will, would have clothes on and not be running around naked, because you're actually seeing an image of something in the past and not necessarily the spirit spirit of that person being actually there. It's kind of like opening up the blinds of a movie theater and looking at something behind the scenes.
All right, but if that is the case and we are looking at something from the past, is this ghost intelligible? Can we communicate with it?
Normally, no, not the residual haunt. In cases that I've investigated and places that I've been to, and people I've talked to, when we have this kind of residual activity, it's very often very low-key stuff. It's things like, first of all, sounds are most prevalent. So you would hear maybe a repetition of somebody walking up and down the stairs, maybe slamming doors, maybe the sound of, pots and pans rattling in the kitchen, things that people might have done normally in their lifetime, but there's simply the sounds of these events taking place. It could be also perhaps the residual nature of a smell that suddenly appears and disappears. That's very, very common to people that might be in the area. That might be their father's cologne, their mother's perfume, something of that nature. It could even be a temperature variance of temperatures inside the room because of cold spots. And again, these things are not interactive as far as communicating with us. It's just an indication of kind of a byproduct that something is there.
All right. So if we're looking at the past or a vision of the past, does this bring us into the multiverse, the multiple dimensional aspects of the new sciences that we're looking at? And do you think that the new sciences will help us better understand the phenomena called ghost?
Well, they can very well sometimes be interdimensional. That's a number of researchers have brought that up in the field in the past. A very famous Fortean researcher, John Keel, who wrote the book The Mothman Prophecies and Strange Creatures in Time and Space, a very well-known researcher, particularly during the UFO flaps of the 60s and 70s, said in several of his books that he noticed that at locations where people had a UFO flap, a tremendous amount of UFO activity in a very small area. He also noticed at that same time that there was an upscale surge of poltergeist activity, hauntings, and even Bigfoot activity, as though some sort of interdimensional doorway was opened up. Everything kind of came in, and then after a while, that doorway reopened, they went out, it slammed behind them, and everything pretty much ceased. So again, it may go into that aspect of the paranormal of interdimensional beings that we're looking at. John Keel called them ultradimensionals.
How close do you think that we are, based on your experience, to actually getting the definitive answer that all ghost researchers are looking for?
The one thing I'm looking for, obviously, is the reason I got involved in the field was to prove the existence of life after death. And I felt that through the use of equipment and through investigating, if we could prove that there were ghosts, we could prove that, obviously, there's definitively prove to scientists and social media and whatever that there were ghosts actually existed. Then they pretty much proved the existence of life after death. And the increase of technology today, with all the equipment that's coming out today, designed by very, very bright minds, I think if we're not right there, we're pretty darn close to being able to prove, or at least come up with a lot more, interactions with ghosts than we were, say, 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. It's just leaps and bounds. So I would venture a guess that within the next 10 years, maybe 10 or 15 years, there's going to be some major breakthrough, either through the use of equipment or something that really sets science turning in a headspin.
But why don't you think the scientific community hasn't already gotten behind the research that's being done by the independents like yourself?
Because scientists very often, they want stuff to be that can be replicated, that can be examined under laboratory conditions. You can't invite a spirit or a ghost into a laboratory and say, okay, now you're going to perform for us, so now you're going to be able to be studied. Ghosts are sometimes a very spontaneous thing. They don't always appear or even show up. In many investigations we've been on, we've gotten absolutely nothing. So it's really kind of the roll of the dice whether or not you're going to get something. And scientists basically need that. I think they're very nebulous in some aspect, that they really need some sort of physical proof that they can replicate, show in the laboratory under laboratory conditions. And if you're looking at that avenue, it's never going to be proven through science.
You said that the reason why you and other researchers do what you do because you're looking for definitive proof of life after death.
Correct.
But there are millions upon millions, if not billions, of people on this planet already who do believe that there is life after death. That's because of their philosophical religious beliefs. So I don't understand. Are you doing this research for those who do not follow any religious doctrine that there is life after death? Or are you using the research that you're doing to complement or to further prove the existence of life after death and that these philosophical religious beliefs are indeed correct?
Well, actually, it's a combination of both. I mean, the reason I started into this was to I was curious about what lied beyond death's door, and I think everybody is. I mean, they always say it's in faith. It's in your belief in faith that there is going to be a life after death, and nobody can prove that unless they've come back. There have been people that have come back from the dead, that had near-death experiences and so forth. Scientists will say that was due to chemicals in the brain, whatever you're being pumped with it at the time. All kind of different neurons firing that might have caused you to see like you're going through a tunnel of light. So, I mean, I'm doing it basically, for not only those people that have had religious experiences, that have had, contacts with ghosts, but also to bring something to the scientific community that they might be able to look at, evidence that we've captured throughout the years, that they might be able to finally say, well, there's something to this, and take a better look.
Well, what has the scientific community said thus far based on the research that you've brought them?
Well, again, when you say scientists, that's kind of a nebulous term. I mean, the scientific community in general does not truly believe that there's really anything to the aspect of the paranormal. And it's really in papers I've written and lectures I've done at colleges and in front of academians and so forth. It basically doesn't really kind of sink home. Again, they're looking at something more of a physical thing that they can examine. What we're looking at something that's more subjective, that maybe you can gather information, you can gather evidence, but again, the evidence that we've gathered have not been under their conditions, under their restrictions and the way they run their business, so to speak. So it's not always something that the scientific community is going to jump up and say, okay, you got this great evidence that, wow, all of a sudden, okay, there's ghosts. It's just not going to be that way. I've actually had skeptics involved in my work in the past. I've actually had scientists and doctors and nurses and other people involved with my work. And again, whether they've sometimes even had paranormal experiences or had contacts with things in our investigations, but again, they always seem to come up with some sort of rational explanation. Well, it was just this, it was just that. Where I'm more open, I think that's the thing that differentiates me from the scientific community, is I keep a very open mind to what we might pick up, might discover at a location, where they're more of show us the proof, show us something that we can examine and that we can replicate.
Besides the fact that, to determine the fact whether or not there is life after death, if in fact it is proven that there is life after death because of the research that ghost researchers like yourself are doing, what happens after that? What happens to ghost hunting, the paranormal? Does it cease to exist?
Oh no, I think it would. I think it would definitely continue. I mean, I truly believe that I've had contacts with spirits through EVP sessions, through real-time devices that we can actually hear responses in real time. I believe that I've actually seen several dozen ghosts in my lifetime. I've had experiences where I've actually been touched. I've had what I believe is pretty hardcore evidence that I believe that something has interacted with me and people in our group. And I think just because we prove that to the scientific community and to the world in general, I think that wouldn't stop. I mean, by any means, that would be. I would assume that science would then get on board with their technology and hopefully be able to build better machinery, better equipment to figure out what exactly they're communicating with, and to bridge the gap from this side to the other. People even like Edison, for a while had a device, or supposedly had a device that he was going to devise to communicate with the dead. And that guy, like Thomas Edison, who was a very well-known inventor, a genius in his own aspect, believed there was a possibility of life after death, that he could communicate with something. It needs to be opened up to the general community and the scientific community to kind of open up their eyes to also that possibility as well.
Do we really need to know if there's life after death?
I think a lot of people are very curious about it because I think a lot of people are very terrified about dying. That they believe that they're finite, that we're basically what we live here on Earth is pretty much the end of it. Especially those that are agnostic or atheists. I think people would feel more comforted knowing that there is a continuation of your consciousness, if nothing else, your energies, your soul, if you will, that leaves the body at the time of death and doesn't just kind of flow away to oblivion, but somehow is actually goes to some other side, to the other side of some kind, altered state of consciousness or higher evolution of consciousness or something of that nature. And I think that would be more comforting to people, knowing that to have that knowledge in hand.
But what would happen if you were able to prove that life does go on after death, and people tried to communicate with those they had lost, and they could not communicate for one reason or another? How do we know that communication would in fact be available to one and all?
Well, that's the thing we don't know, unfortunately, and we don't always know that you can always communicate with everybody you try to communicate with, and this is very evident in research that we've done in the past 40-plus years that I've been doing this in the field. Places we've gone to where we know specific people have died here at certain locations. We know the background, we know the information, we know their first and last names, we know a lot about these people, and yet these people just simply don't come through. And or they lived here for a very, very long time and died in this home, or a tragedy happened here. You would think that if the spot where the person's soul left their body and supposedly they perished at that point, that would be the location that you would hope to be able to communicate with something, because that's where they last touched the ground in human form.
But how do we know the soul leaves at the time of death?
We don't really know that, and that's something that we've been trying to prove for many years. I mean, scientists, doctors, I won't say scientists, strike that. Actually, doctors have said that there is a minute amount of weight that is actually lost when the person has passed. It's a weight loss that they have actually been able to weigh in operating rooms and in hospital beds. So very, very, very small amount. It's not so much you're exhaling. It's just basically or loss of bodily fluids, but something else that they believe has left the body. So I mean, this is what I've been striving for, and I'm sure a lot of other researchers in the field are striving for, is to bridge that gap from this side to the other and make some sort of steadfast communication.
Sure. Dale, stand by. You and I have to take our news break with Amanda Curran at the bottom of the hour, our sweetheart in Sydney, Nova Scotia. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell. Dale Kaczmarck is our very special guest, a good friend of the X Zone. His website is ghostresearch.org, and we'll both be back on the other side of this break with the news as we continue investigating the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology right here in the X Zone. Don't go away.
listening to the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net. Radio's authority on the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology, celebrating 25 years of broadcasting. Broadcasting around the world and to the great beyond.
This is News from the X-Zone. I'm Amanda Curran. For the first time ever, NASA's Cassini spacecraft has spotted deep gorges and complex river systems flooded with super cold liquid methane on Saturn's largest moon, Titan. This is the only other planetary body in our entire solar system known to have naturally occurring liquid on its surface. NASA spokesman David Lum explains that upward movements in the terrain caused by earthquakes could send liquid punching deeply down, like it did around Grand Canyon, or variations in the sea level could have increased the river's rate of erosion, like it did in the formations of Lake Powell, which runs off the Colorado River. It is likely that a combination of these forces contributed to the formation of the deep canyons, but at present it's not clear to what degree each was involved. Cassini will complete its 20-year mission sometime next year, but hopefully before then, it will receive more information from the canyon area. Scientists have discovered a minor planet that exists past Neptune, and while it is an exciting find, it provides more questions than answers. Nicknamed Niku, it orbits the Sun on a plane that's tilted 110 degrees to the plane of the solar system, and it is currently above the plane and rising higher, which will eventually start lowering as it orbits back around in a retrograde, or backwards orbit of the Sun. Niku's orbit goes against the flow of pretty much everything else in the solar system, and on such an unnatural angle, astrophysicist Matthew Hallman from the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics says, it suggests that there's more going on in the outer solar system than we're fully aware of. Scientists theorize that the object must have come in collision with something else, or was pulled off course by another gravitational source, but as for right now, nobody knows what this other object, or group of objects, could be. A strange new video posted online shows a mysterious red object zigzagging in the sky above the streets of Paris. At first, the couple that filmed the sighting thought it was just the street light until it became clear that it was much higher than the other street lights, and as they zoomed in, the fiery light disappeared. The footage emerged just days after people claimed NASA footage showed a golden UFO hovering above the Earth's atmosphere, which has many viewers claiming this grainy footage is just the latest proof that aliens are visiting our planet. Check out the video at our Facebook page at Rob McConnell's X-Zone Radio Show and tell us what you think. I'm Amanda Curran, News from the X-Zone.
Coming soon to the X-Zone Broadcast Network is A Different Perspective with me, Kevin Randall, as your host. We'll be taking a close look at what is happening in the world of UFOs today with side trips into the paranormal. Guests will range from those who are household names to those who have a different perspective on a variety of topics. No topic will be taboo, but there will be tough questions asked as we all search for the truth about UFOs, the paranormal, and those things that excite us. Sometimes we'll agree with a guest and sometimes we won't, but we'll try to keep the program topical. For those of you who would like to read, be sure to visit www.kevinrandall.blogspot.com and remember to listen to the other fine programs on the X-Zone Broadcast Network at www.xzbn.net.
Join High Tech with Corey K. weekly here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. From the world of computers to the ever-popular computerized gadgetry that are becoming part of our everyday life and living and society. From kids and their gaming devices, teens and their smartphones, to the applications of personal and business computers. From hardware to software, from standalone units to network computers. Join high-tech guru Corey K. weekly right here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network as he takes on the topics that will be of use and great value to the international audience of the X-Zone Broadcast Network. High Tech with Corey K. weekends at 9 p.m. Eastern, only on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net. And welcome back, everyone. The X Zone with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. You can always join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/X Zone Radio Show. And you can send an email to studio@xzoneradiotv.com. Our website, xzoneradio.com. Dale Kaczmarck is our special guest this hour, www.ghostresearch.org. In your opinion, based on the years that you've been doing the research, what was your aha moment, the moment that you knew that what you were doing was real?
Well, I've had a lot of aha moments, actually, through my research. But I guess one of the most interesting encounters, and this is, I guess, fairly early. This is going back probably to the early 1980s or so. So relatively early in my career. I was out in Southwest City, Missouri, investigating a report of an apparition of a female that was seen in this cemetery on a nightly basis. Now, the thing that always bothered me about cemeteries is, what would draw a spirit back to a gravestone where your earthly remains are buried. That I had a real problem with. There can be other reasons, such as grave desecration, rituals that have done out there, sometimes satanic in nature, that could perhaps stir things up. There was no history of this, apparently, but there was a report of a woman seen nightly making the rounds through the cemetery, and all the local people knew about it. So I was, at that time, in Joplin, Missouri, investigating a spook light out there in Joplin, Missouri, a very famous ghost light, which I wrote a book on, and was not that far away, decided to head out to Southwest City, Missouri, and to try to find out what was going on. I was sure that most likely a misinterpretation of the facts, or something that somebody just did not know what they were seeing, and probably was not a ghost at all, because ghosts don't usually show up every single night. So I went out to the location, couldn't really find anybody that I could actually have interviewed in the first person. It was always a friend of a friend who had seen this.
Right.
Became a little skeptical about what I had got myself into. I went out to the location anyway and began to kind of look around generally where they said this spirit was supposed to make the rounds at night. And I had a camera with me, a 35 millimeters camera, had some color infrared film. And the thing with infrared film, it often picks up frequencies and wavelengths that are not visible to the naked eye beyond our capability of seeing. And I've used that film successfully in other investigations. I've gotten some interesting results. So I went out there, began looking around, and this was around 8 o'clock in the evening. It was a summer evening, so the sun was still up for another half hour, 45 minutes. It was still quite bright outside. And I actually saw what appeared to be a shape or a form, more like a collection of fog or mist, actually. And it's some parts were very translucent, other parts were more visually opaque. You couldn't see through it. It seemed to be moving around in an uncharacteristic fashion. Of course, being a scientific-minded person, right away rattling through all the possibilities of what I'm actually seeing here or not seeing here. It wasn't cigarette smoke. I wasn't smoking. I didn't even smoke back then. It wasn't the proper temperature or humidity for ground fog to form. It had not just rain. It wasn't humid outside. So I decided to at least snap a picture of this and to document it, and then later perhaps look at what I might have picked up on the film. So I snapped the picture, snapped actually two, pulled the camera away from my eye. The fog was still there. And the way it disappeared was one of the most unusual ways I've ever seen anything disappear. It was like somebody had pulled a cork out of a bathtub. This little mist kind of spiraled down like a little white tornado into the ground and was gone in an instant. Now, I never saw anything like that since that time. I could not, for the heck of me, figure out what I had just seen.
Yeah.
When I finally got the film back, when I got back to Chicago, I looked at the film. It did not show the mist, which was unusual. Usually when people take photographs of cameras and so forth, they don't see the ghost, but the ghost will show up on the film. This time I actually saw the ghost, and the ghost didn't show up on the film, just kind of the opposite. but the entire area where this apparition or ghost, whatever it was there, was kind of bathed in an eerie blue light, very uncharacteristic for the type of film I was using. Was this the ghost that people had seen? I'm not sure. But whatever it was, it surely disappeared in a very uncharacteristic fashion.
You know, you and I were discussing earlier about the weight or the loss of weight, and it was driving me crazy because I remembered I had a guest on the show. We discussed it, and it was Dr. Janice Amatuzio. She is a forensic pathologist, and she has confirmed more than once that at the time of the time of death, there is a difference in weight of 21 grams.
Okay.
So
I remember it's not. If I remember what I read about somewhere on the internet or through maybe a book that I had read somewhere, it wasn't it's a very minute amount. It wasn't very much weight loss, but it was something that was measurable.
21 grams.
Okay.
And that's been noted by a number of physicians and pathologists. So we're not talking about something here that is theoretical. We're talking about something that has actually been scientifically documented.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when we start communicating with the other side, how do we do that? Because it's like trying to communicate with an unknown species using a totally different type of communication system. Like, how do they understand the voice? How do they understand our reality if, in fact, they are not part of this living sphere anymore?
That's a good question. Again, if we're dealing with, and again, the only ones that would interact or be able to communicate with us are those that I consider those intelligent spirits, those ones that have, if you will, a surviving personality, a soul, if you will, that has survived, which I think we all do survive, but I mean, that's interacting with us at the time. And the idea has often been launched by a number of different scientific people in the community. Einstein said it very eloquently that energy cannot be created nor destroyed, but it simply changes form. Now, I don't think he was talking about ghosts generally. He was just talking theoretical, but a lot of his theories, which are theories, are now proven to be beyond theory. They actually exist in science. The idea of communicating with somebody and getting their voice on tape goes all the way back to the time of Dr. Konstantin Radové. I think actually the very first one was Philip Jurgensen, actually. He was actually out trying to audio tape and record bird songs. And he noticed that when he went back and he played back these bird songs, there was something else there. There were human voices that were nowhere near. He was out in the middle of a field or out in a meadow or wherever he was recording. Nobody else was out there, and he was not talking. Obviously, he was being very quiet, trying to record these bird sounds. And then later on, through people like Professor Hans Bender of Freiburg University, Dr. Konstantin Radové, he wrote a book called The Breakthrough. People like Sarah Eastep from the American Association of Electronic Voice Phenomena, they all began to pick up their tape recorders, at that time it was open reel tape recorders, and try to communicate with spirits. Now, in many cases, these voices came through. They'd often answer questions, sometimes even identified themselves who they were. But in many cases, sometimes the sound wasn't always just perfect. The pitch wasn't just right. Sometimes their voice would even come on the reverse or wrong side of recording tape. So you'd have to put a twist in the tape, play it forward, and then the sounds would come back in a normal tone. Now, I guess we're way beyond that. We're at the point now, way beyond even cassette tape recorders or what they call digital audio tapes. We're into the point time of digital, even beyond analog now, and we're making progress in recording spirit voices on that. Now, the whole idea with obviously communicating with spirits is that typically an EVP session, or for electronic voice phenomena, takes place as you sit in a location where you believe to have a spirit activity or you're wishing to communicate with somebody. You ask a question. You normally leave 20 seconds or so of blank space for the response. You ask another question, leave 20 seconds, and so forth and so on until you complete your session. Then you go back, you listen to the in-betweens, the questions, to see if there's a response. Now, that always bugged me because, I mean, you're doing an investigation several hundred miles away, and then you get back home 700 miles away, and then you listen to it, and you may have picked up the Class A EVP, but you're 700 miles away. So much for two-way communication. It's really kind of a one-sided communication. You didn't know that anything was recorded because the sounds didn't appear until, or were heard in real time. They were only appeared on the recording device or the media. So in this day and age, we have what's called these real-time EVP devices that you can actually hear a response in real time. Some like the Obelisk, some the Ghost Box or Spirit Boxes, some actually digital recorders or devices that you can actually hear the responses in real time. So you can actually hold a conversation, if you will, with what might be on the other side. And that's where the breakthrough comes in, where before it was one-sided. Now you can hold basically a conversation, or at least attempt to hold a conversation. You can get a response, build a response to that response, and continue down that track. Now, in some cases, we have gotten communications from several, many different, I believe, people have passed on that did hold conversations with us for many minutes.
All right, so if we're saying that we're communicating with pure energy here that has taken a different form, wouldn't it be possible, instead of traveling to all these different places that are haunted, to actually do it from one location, knowing how to communicate or how to focus a call to the spirit and have the spirit come to where you are, just like they do with mediums? And that brings up another possibility. Are ghost researchers also mediums and channels?
Yeah, I mean, we don't know the second part of the question. I mean, that could be very well be. I mean, I believe everybody is somewhat psychic or somewhat intuitive. If you say you're not intuitive, you are intuitive. I mean, everybody has had things that have happened to them that may be deemed psychic or intuitive. The idea of producing or communicating from spirits from afar has always been something that's fascinated me, believe it or not. That idea of sort of like, if you for lack of a better term, a spirit radio, literally to turn on a radio and be able to communicate from long distances, through the airwaves, whether it comes through, satellite or if it comes through, hard wires, or even wireless, like, the old Marconi device, to actually get a communication from afar. I mean, that kind of device, to my way of thinking, has not yet been developed. I mean, I don't know what it would, what the implications are, or the technology would be to build such a device. I know in some of the ghost boxes, the spirit boxes, they do actually quickly scan the AM, FM frequencies at a very, very high rate, sometimes as fast as 6 to 7 channels per second, and you're getting entire responses and full sentences coming through. If you're scanning on that fast of a frequency, you're not picking up stray radio signals that simply came together to fill out an entire sentence like, "Get out of here," or "My name is Joe," or something like that. It's just impossible to do. What we're most likely picking up are spirits talking in the white noise between the stations, that kind of hiss between the radio stations. And if we were to develop something in those aspects that they could use as a carrier frequency, even Sarah Estep, way back in the 70s, would often use white noise in the background, which she said was sort of like for the spirits that they use for amplifying their voices, kind of a, for lack of a better term, almost like a carrier wavelength. Yeah. Even though it's there's white noise, there's pink noise, all different types of noises. And she got a lot of good responses when she used those types of devices. Now, the most recent ghost box that I'm going to be, I just purchased here, actually eliminates that kind of like the scanning between the stations where you hear the it's just the voices simply will be coming through. And I think that'll be a little bit easier to hear what's being said because you don't have to disembed it, if you will, from the background hiss of these scanning frequencies that you're trying to scan to make a communication.
But isn't there also a theory that what is being picked up by ghost researchers as EVPs and now through this new technology that is coming out is simply thought transference from someone within the group?
That's always been a possibility as well. I mean, it would be impossible, I believe, to differentiate between the two, unless the person that you're... That's why a lot of times that we do investigations, in fact, all the times we do investigations in the private homes, when our group is brought in, literally nobody in the group has told anything about where we're going. All they know is they're going to allegedly a place that's haunted. They don't know anything about the history. They don't know anything about the phenomena. They don't know anything about the people we're going to see. So therefore, it's very scientific, I believe, that if they do pick up things when they're there, or if they pick up things in their recording devices, there's no way for them to have done prior research on that area before we got there. So it couldn't have been, at least in that aspect, a possibility of thought transference. What you're picking up is most likely something coming from the other side.
Or how about they have the ability to pick up a psychic impression of something that was once there, that is no longer there?
Oh, absolutely. And, that, again, is something that a lot of psychics do employ. Sometimes they use what they call psychometry.
Yeah.
They pick up feelings, emotions, past lives of people that have lived there simply by entering into an environment. Psychics that are used for missing persons, and I have worked with a number of psychics that have worked with the police. In fact, in the past, with missing persons, are often given articles of clothing, jewelry, maybe a child's toy, in the attempt to gather information or psychic impressions of whether or not that person's still alive, where that person may be. And there have been, numerous police people that I've talked to, police officials that I've talked to, have said that they have been, in many cases, very helpful.
We're running out of time really fast. We've got about 4 minutes left. What's coming up as far as the tours and excursions that you're doing?
Well, actually, this Saturday, we're actually heading out to Indianapolis, Indiana, and we're actually going to be part of a big meet and greet out there. And then after that, we're going to be investigating a site called Thornhaven Manor, which is an old manor that dates back to about 1840, I believe. And we're going to be spending the overnight in there to do some investigative work. A little bit later in the year, we're going to be heading out to, in September, out to a place called Hillview Manor, which was an old insane asylum in Newcastle, Pennsylvania. And we seem to get our best evidence by far at 3 different locations: hospitals, prisons, and old insane asylums. If you just think about that for a moment, just think of the things that happens in hospitals, prisons, and insane asylums, especially ones, the older insane asylums where they use frontal lobotomies, electric shock therapy, ice baths, chaining people down to the beds. We get a lot of interesting things from those locations, so we're looking forward to a couple of these investigations coming up later in the summer.
Why do people keep going back? Why do different organizations and different groups keep going back to the same old? For example, Waverly.
Right.
Why
Maybe because they've gotten some really, really good evidence. I mean, there's been some cases we went back several times to a couple places. Old South Pittsburgh Hospital in South Pittsburgh, Tennessee. Also, Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in Weston, West Virginia. Both times we went to those locations. We've been there 3 or 4 times. We've gotten some amazing evidence. We've actually picked up and heard 9 disembodied screams coming down the hallway, which actually people can go to my website and actually listen to some of those EVPs and those videos we've actually captured, and it's pretty amazing. This is beyond an EVP. This is a disembodied voice, something you hear in real time.
All right, so if your group has found this and you've got it online, why would other groups and other people want to go there? Is it getting to a point where there's a lack of respect for those who have passed being brought on by all this curiosity?
I think it's the second half of your statement. It's the curiosity factor. It's the curiosity of, am I going to have a paranormal experience when I go here? Something going to happen to me? Am I going to be pushed? Am I going to be scratched? Is something going to show up on my digital recorder? Am I going to get an interesting picture? I mean, I think it's the wow factor. Unfortunately, that drives a lot of people to go back to these locations. For me, it's the research of trying to, like I say, research the existence of life after death, communicate with spirits, find out why they're still there in many cases, if we possibly can, and to kind of bridge that gap where other people might simply be going there for the thrill of it.
Is it time where people should start backing away and show a lot more respect for the dead?
Oh, I think absolutely. I mean, this is something that I believe should be left to serious paranormal investigators. But I mean,
exactly.
There are so many people out there, like I say, just they go into it for the thrill of it. People that join our group go through a regular interview process, so I make sure that by the time they walk out the door, and I have a very good feeling for where these people's mindset are, if they're wanting to join the group simply for a thrill or simply to be a very serious researcher.
As always, Dale, time goes by so fast when you're with us, so let our listeners know how they can find out more about you and your excursions and the great work that you do.
Sure, they can go to my website, which is the easiest way. That's www.ghostresearch.org. I also have a Facebook page on Facebook, a Ghost Research Society page on Facebook, or they can contact me through the internet, through my email, which is simply dale@ghostresearch.org.
Dale, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's always a great pleasure talking to you, and thank you for the great work that you do.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
You take care of yourself, my friend. Exo Nation, Dale Kaczmarck has been our guest, and it's always great hearing someone who talks and makes sense, because God knows in this society, this is what we need more of. I'll be back on the other side of this break as we continue here in the X Zone with Dr. Donald K. Preston. And Don and I are going to be talking about Satanism and why the youth of today are so involved and interested in joining satanic cults and organizations at a speed never seen before in history. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell. And whatever you do, don't go away, because like I said, Don K. Preston and I will be back to discuss this and much more. Don't go away now.